live on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for joining us today on Sam Practice Day. Today, we're going to talk about the every pot of gold every CX exec looking for
Mhm.
health score, or the signal that actually predicts churn. So today, I'm joined by Brent from Reef.ai and Anthony from Protia Revenue Systems. Thank you today.
Hello, Emma.
And I'll let you, yes, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you.
Great. Happy to go first. I'm Brent Grimes, founder CEO of Reef.ai. Prior to Reef, I was at MuleSoft for 7 years, built and led the customer success org there. And this is near and dear to my heart because it was, the scoring was really the inspiration for Reef. And I saw the impact firsthand as we drove our gross retention up 9 points and our net retention up 18 points over my tenure there, and largely due to our ability to get our arms around our customer data and do a better job of using machine learning, predictive scoring to make decisions about where we invest and where we don't. So excited about the conversation today.
Oh, nice, nice. I'm Anthony DeShazor. I'm founder and chief architect at Protia Revenue Systems. Prior to that, I was actually the senior vice president of customer success and experience at a donation platform by the name of Givelify. And before that, I was at Rimini Street. And before that, I was at Hitachi Vantara, where we actually found that Brett and I have a common colleague, that transferred with me along the way. But my passion today is just really how do we build systems that really drive revenue? And that's everything from the people, the processes, the data, and most importantly, the tooling behind helping us basically get a hold of customer data and champion it to its maximum. So that's my focus. So Brent, I think it's just the two of us. I think Emma is having a little difficulty with a connection. So why don't we begin with something that I think is very kind of appropriate? Why do health scores get it wrong? Why do we have such watermelon accounts? The ones that are green on the outside, but really red on the inside.
Yeah, I think there's the historically, and then I think there's the kind of the scenario today where there's more tools available. But I think the fundamental gap is that to date there have been limited tools to really make sense of, really to get a complete picture of a customer and understand all the different things that may tie into risk that give you a reliable early warning signal for risk or for growth opportunity, right? And so I think the standard that's been built around health scores to date is based on what you have access to in terms of the data points, right? Some of them might be, if you're lucky, maybe some of those come from the product, they're coming from your engagements with customers. Some of them are very subjective, based on your own opinion of what's happening in the calls with people. And so I think it's just the inconsistency is one thing. I think the idea that people don't always tell you outright what's going on or what's on their mind. They don't want to hurt your feelings, and they might hide things that in a conversation that might be obvious in data but is not coming through in those conversations, right? So if you're relying on subjective information or you have a limited purview, it's going to inherently limit the effectiveness of your health scores. I think the other thing is they're not predictive, right? You actually, in order to really have a predictive score, you can't just monitor what's happening today in real time. You need to understand over multiple quarters, multiple years, what have been the factors that have statistically led to customer churn or downsell or upsell or cross sell. And the beauty is there are technologies, a lot of advancements in machine learning that will allow you to look across hundreds, even thousands of data points over multiple years and find those patterns and then be able to give you predictions into what's likely to happen in the future. And I think if you look at the standards around customer success platforms, CRM platforms, those predictive scoring capabilities just haven't been incorporated or put to use. So I think we've all accepted that health scoring is what the systems provide. So we use what's there versus really understanding kind of what's going to move the needle in terms of revenue predictability and the ability to, in a very specific way, drive GRR up in a way that is measurable, accountable, et cetera.
I love that. My take is very similar. I think the biggest challenge is health scores were asked to do something with available data that was, that was at the time ready at our fingertips. And so we put together a lot of activity monitoring was really the only data we had. And so we used that to try to predict something. But what health scores typically miss out is the actual behavior behind it. And I love the fact that you're focusing on that regression. Let's look at the data and see what the data actually tells us, not what our gut tells us, but what does the data actually show? If you could kind of give a magic wand to CS leaders and customer revenue leaders today, what would you tell them to instantly fix about their data?
Yeah. I think that often CS leaders are second-class citizens in terms of prioritization for data availability, right? I think that, I experienced this at MuleSoft. I had to pound my fist on the table for multiple years to actually start to get a workable set of data to do what we did around scoring. So I think as product thinks about what they prioritize for availability, it's more for product's own goals, not necessarily customer goals, even though, again, customer first is what makes any organization successful. So I
Mhm.
think that data availability is a huge part of that. I think the other thing too, I think there's a misconception out there. I think everything is viewed through a similar lens when it comes to customer data and scoring. And I think it's important to draw a really clear distinction between real-time analytics and long-range predictions. Right? And because most organizations do a relatively good job with real-time analytics. So these are, what are the data signals you're tracking day to day that are prompting prioritization and action, right? So it might be you have some good product engagement signals that show up on a dashboard that, if somebody is dropping in a certain product engagement signal, it's probably not a good thing, right? Or maybe there's just some other signal from support or another sentiment, et cetera, that's really good to understand day to day. But a lot of people don't really have their arms around the long range predictions. And so there's an analogy I like to use is that when you're going on a road trip in your car, you have a set of real-time analytics, right? You have your dashboard in front of you with your speedometer and your gas gauge and the ability and your vision, the ability to look at what's right in front of you on the road and make decisions about how you drive and how you stay safe, right? But you also have a GPS. You also have this long-range prediction system that gives you visibility into things you can't see today. It allows you to understand 10 miles down the road, there's an accident or there's a police officer. So the decisions you make now will impact whether you spend 30 minutes going those 10 miles or whether you spend 10 minutes doing those 10 miles or whether you get a ticket or not, right? And so the way I think about the best performing organizations have figured out how to pair those real-time analytics with predictive forecasting. And if you use these things together, you get good at reacting to the signals day to day, but you also get good at predicting where is there a smoke developing that we can't really see today, but we know will be a problem, and actually get ahead of trouble before it actually manifests.
Love the analogy because our dashboards that most companies have and CSPs are built on are more like real time. Hey, here's what happened today or yesterday. They're near real time, but a lot of the revenue impacts could happen 5 years back. That could be something that happened 3 years back that we've forgotten that may impact revenue tomorrow. Or it
Sure.
could be something going on in the economy in a particular industry, or it could even be something that was reported in the SEC notes or something of that nature that could suggest that there's challenges ahead. So I love that analogy that you have to have really two ways of looking at the data. You have to look at what's happening now and what can happen or what might happen in the future. Most people today, I'm one of them, have LLMs at their fingertips.
Yep.
And so, if you read LinkedIn, you can think everyone can come up with a great, perfect health score by just, this prompt. You use this prompt and add your data, and you're going to increase your predictability of your health scores by 200%. Where's the lie in that? Or
Yeah.
even where's the truth?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the truth. The truth is LLMs provide an opportunity to do something better than most of us have been doing over the past few years. I personally believe that with an LLM, you can get a better health score than manually assembling a set of fields that you choose and how to weight those and getting to an ultimate health score. Because with an LLM, you can be more inclusive. You can include both unstructured data and structured data, and you can, include a lot of context and get to a pretty reasonable conclusion about customer health overall. There's a couple of traps though. One is that it's not truly predictive, right? It's using context and it makes sense, and it may be better than what you have as a general health score. It'll be hard for you to prove whether it's better or not, because there's just, unless you have a really strict methodology about A/B testing and measuring kind of what happens as a result of these things, right? So it's still a little bit of guesswork in terms of understanding how effective it is and how it's moving the needle. I think the bigger trap, though, is that LLMs are really good at making you feel good about what they're telling you. So it's going to construct context for a customer or an answer that sounds really good and makes logical sense based on the signals you're feeding it, especially if you're feeding it sentiment signals, right? So it's going to be very consistent with the human experience and what you've experienced in your own opinion. So it will often reinforce what you already believe about accounts versus really kind of showing you insights that you might have missed or other things, right? So I think it's a step forward. I think if you have an opportunity to use LLMs and you don't have access to machine learning and kind of these the self-reinforcing systems that are proving their ability to accurately predict future outcomes and then reinforcing themselves based on new data coming in and what's happening, like as a step above a health score, it's a good start and a good way to make some incremental improvement. But today, LLMs are not good at actually driving measurable kind of back-tested, validated predictions, right? And so that's where the line between what you can do with LLMs today and then what you can do with machine learning. What we're seeing kind of the best examples is actually using these things together, right? So using LLMs to derive some kind of structure or some meaning from a lot of unstructured data and conversations, whether it's live meetings or whether it's support notes, case notes, etc. Having a read on sentiment and other things can be helpful inputs to a predictive scores, but in themselves, they're not predictive. So the idea is that you can assemble the outputs of LLMs with your structured data over time. So what is your revenue history with customers and how has that changed over that time? What products do they own or not own, and how has that changed over the last few years? What's happening in terms of support volume and escalations? What's happening with marketing engagement and product engagement, right? How has that changed across an array of different capabilities in our product over time? And then a predictive score will allow you to take all of those inputs and it will start to train itself based on what are the patterns historically that have led to churn. And so just the way this works in practice is that we might find a churn event 4 months ago, right? And so we'll go back and say, okay, well, it's less important to know what was happening 4 months ago. It was more important to understand what was happening, 9 months, 12 months before that churn event, right? And so what was everything that was going on with the customer? Not only at that moment of time 9 months ago, but what happened leading up to that? What were the trends across product engagement or support engagement or sentiment leading up to that 9-month kind of pre-churn event? Because the idea is that you don't want to predict churn on the day that somebody churns. You want to predict churn 6 months, 9 months, 12 months in advance so that you can regularly intervene and make sure that you're using your natural CS engagement to mitigate risk. Again, whether that's through people or whether that's digital or now through agents, right? That you're identifying the customers that are statistically most likely to churn, and you're following those probabilities consistently, engaging early, which will ultimately allow you to save a lot of revenue that would have otherwise churned, or grow customers faster, more significantly than if you just wait for them to figure out on their own a good time to expand. So there's again, these LLMs are helpful, but there's still a big gap between what they can do and this predictive scoring system that will be trained on those specific churn examples, that will also feed in new data daily and will track whether customers are renewing or not based on recommendations. And so it has this closed loop feedback system that will constantly self-learn, self-improve. And again, it's just anything. You can hack something together that can be a good start, but it's very different than something that's productized and designed for scale and designed to naturally get better over time.
I love that in that it says you can use LLMs to get started and even maybe go a long way because it's
Yeah.
better than what you can do manually or just with human eyes. But there comes a point where you may want to get a third party specifically designed and maintained solution. Primarily if you want that traceability and that repeatability. Because one of the things I've learned in working with customers with LLMs, to your point, LLMs can, I won't even call it hallucinate, they can kind of think on their own, so to speak. And you can give it the same data and come up with two different conclusions on the same data. So it's not really doing predictions, it's finding patterns that it sees. And that depends largely on the context that it has at that moment. And so once that you kind of grow out of that, you may need something that's a little bit more, I call it robust, something that really has that repeatability part built in, particularly if you're going to be in any compliance scenario where you may have to have some traceability. Hey, we took this action because we saw this, because this happened, and this is why. And so that may be something that a dedicated product could help with. Help us kind of demystify the difference between metrics and signals. You know,
Sure.
because I see that all over the place. People write, "Hey, you need to find the signals in your health data, you know, your customer data." What's the difference between a metric and a signal for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is semantics, but I do think there is a difference between, we kind of talked about the real-time analytics and kind of long-range predictions, and the idea is that a metric is, at least in my view, a metric is a data point that you can track about a customer, right? And it might, and typically it's a structured data point, right? So it might be, how many times in the last 30 days did a customer engage a certain product signal, right? Or within a day, right? It just depends on the nature of the product and what you're tracking, right? Or it might be how many support cases did a customer log over a certain period of time, right? Or it might be, look, there, again, the tools are getting better, so it might be, hey, we had a Zoom call with a customer, and they got a sentiment score of 3 out of 5 on that call, right? And so I think there's different metrics out of there that you can start to assemble that can be good signals to start to understand about your customers. But to truly gain signal, you have to have some level of confidence that the metric is meaningful and allows you to understand, is this metric a symptom that we should prioritize as a symptom of risk for a likely future churn or some kind of revenue outcome. And so the predictive models and the training will allow you to start to demystify, based on a lot of different metrics, which of them are truly early warning signal that you, one, should just take more seriously and track day to day, but two, are predictive. And so the key to a good predictive model is not just tracking a single signal, because on its own, you can understand what is the relative predictive power of any independent metric, and how much does that matter independently outside of any other context in terms of correlation to churn. And that's useful to understand because you can only put so many metrics on a dashboard, and you don't want to overwhelm people, and you want to prioritize things that are meaningful. But the best predictive models monitor these different metrics working together in concert, and that's really the magic of machine learning. Is it can experiment and test thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different combinations of metrics working together to understand what is the best combination of these different metrics working together to provide the most reliable future predictions. And from there, you can deploy a model with the metrics working together that produce the best predictions. And then at any moment in time, you can understand for a given customer, what are the top metrics for this customer, or signals now that you actually have an understanding that they matter, that are contributing to risk for this customer or detracting for risk, right? So when you get a risk warning, it's because there is a statistical probability that they are likely to churn in, let's say, the next 6 to 9 months, right? And so organizations that put a lot of discipline around following the probabilities consistently, right? So there's a lot of sports organizations that have committed to using data as a way to construct their rosters or to make game time decisions. If you can run a CS organization in a way that you have access to data and understanding of probabilities, and you engage those probabilities in a consistent way, then that's where you can reliably move the needle on things like churn and growth. And if you have a goal going into the year saying, look, we need to improve our GRR by 2 basis points, like that's a pretty ambitious goal. And a lot of organizations will experiment and try things. They say, okay, we can't do nothing. Like, we've got to change something from what we did. So we're going to go use an LLM to generate a score and see how well it works. That's very different than actually deploying a system that will give you insight into probabilities and say, look, this predictive model can prove its ability to identify 78% of customers who churn 9 months in advance of that churn event, right? And so if you know that you can take those 78% of customers and you run or the customers that are showing up as likely to churn, and you run a play in every one of those, well, again, whether it's with humans or digital, you're going to recover a lot of revenue that you wouldn't have recovered otherwise. And it's going to really move the needle on GRR in a predictable way. So the whole idea is that this is a much more deterministic way to go drive improvement versus an experiment that may be a good idea and is something new to try on the surface, but you don't have the same confidence that it's going to deliver results.
The way I explain that when I talk to different CS leaders or CROs is that the difference between a metric and a signal is a metric is typically a number. It's, hey, this is a data. It has no meaning. The signal is what can I extract? The meaning can I extract from the data? And so someone telling me, hey, their adoption went down, I look at that, I don't care. What does that mean? Tell me the meaning of that. And that meaning can often only be found in relationship to other metrics. These so-called compound signals, I think, are what most health scores miss. And that causes us to call an account green because we're looking at the individual metrics and everything looks good. But when you combine those metrics, you get a different story because of the compound signals that you're getting. This one metric went down by 5% relative to historic numbers. Well, that doesn't seem big by itself. But this other metric also went down by 20%. And it's that combination that sneaks up on us and causes surprise churn because it was a signal or a compound signal that was there, but we didn't have the eyes, so to speak, to see what was right in front of us. And that's where I think machine learning in particular, which is different than LLMs, but machine learning in particular is very good at finding those compound things, that this in relationship to this other number over here that may come from a totally different system, that may, when combined with this other event, that is the strong tell. And that's where when I get into these conversations, I help to elevate the conversation between metrics and signals. So then we can get out of the debate. Do you count logins or do you count usage of a feature? And the answer is you count all of it. What you're looking for is what signals do each of those tell us in conjunction with the other data we have.
Yeah, really great point. I think that's one of the major benefits of machine learning is that you don't have to be judicious and say, okay, well, we're going to go find 8 signals that are going to be the root of our health score, right? You can throw even across product. We have clients that have thousands of product signals, and you can use machine learning to sort through which of these actually have meaning and which don't, which should be the ones that you're running in the model. And you can use machine learning to run tons of experiments to sort out what truly is predictive and what should be used regularly in creating these predictive scores. So that's a really great point, Anthony.
How important is it to define your, if you would, your signaling, be it through ML or LLM,
Yeah.
based upon customer segment? Because I've gotten into companies and they have one health score for all their customers, and
Yeah.
I instantly cringe because an
Yeah.
enterprise customer is going to perform or behave differently than an
Yeah.
SMB customer. Their decision matrix is different. The politics are different. Even who you get access to are different in those scenarios. So, how important is it to figure out the right scoring mechanism by segment?
Yeah, it's a great call out. So it really depends on the nature of your business and also just the volume of your business, right? So there is a requirement with machine learning, and is that you do need to have a sufficient number of training examples, right? And so in our world, if we're creating a churn prediction model, one, we're going to train a churn prediction model differently than we would train a downsell model, because like you point out, like a segment, the behaviors that predict full churn are often different than the behaviors that predict downsell. So having models
Hmm.
that are trained independently for each use case are important. And the same thing for segments. So if you have, we've been able to effectively um, train these machine learning based predictive models with as few as about 400 customers. So if you've got 100 customers, then you're going to be much better off using an LLM or some kind of rules-based scoring, because you don't have the luxury of enough training data to be able to use machine learning. But if you get segments of customers with cohorts of 500, 1,000 customers, then you're in a position where you can take advantage of being able to do that segmentation. And you're right, like for almost any business I can think of, the way that their enterprise and mid-market customers are often different, and the predictors for churn are often very different than the behaviors that you would see for an SMB or a long tail customer. So it is best practice to develop bespoke models trained for these different segments. But I would also say that it is perfectly fine, and we do this with a lot of customers, to start with a generalized model across your business as a first model to, one, prove that, in our case, that Reef can be effective with your data, that we can deliver good predictions, and to gain that level of confidence. Because one, it's less expensive to start with fewer models, and it's a way
Hmm.
to prove that it is what you think it is. And then from there, you can start to break apart cohorts and do more refined scoring. But even a score across the entire base will be much better than what companies have used historically. And we find that even a first model across a business will be able to prove that it's 4 times more accurate at predicting churn, at least, than the rules-based or LLM-based score they were using prior to Reef. And then you can continue to tune from there. So I have this saying that's a spin on a commonly known quote, which is, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of revenue," right? Which is like, hey, get going, get something started that's going to be better than what you're doing today. Start to reap the benefits, and you're going to learn a lot in that process that will allow you to refine over time and continue to turn the dial and squeeze out more revenue.
Yeah, my saying is don't let complexity kill progress. It's like you don't want to over engineer something. But I think the key part there is to set the right expectations at what you're getting. So
Yeah,
if you are going in with a single model to score all your customers universally, then kind of modulate your expectations appropriately. You may still find some green accounts that churn in that model because it's only as good as the data that it has. And if you're treating all your customers the same, even though they're different, then you're absolutely almost abstracting some of that uniqueness out of the data. So
sure.
that's the key part there. Whenever I work with customers, say, hey, get started. But
Yeah,
the goal is not to have a perfect score on day one. The
yeah,
goal is to set up a model or a mechanism where your score improves, your risk detection improves with each iteration.
yeah,
Hey, we're better in Q2 than we were in Q1 because we have more data and we've been able to fine tune the model. And Q3 is going to be better than Q2. And that's the mentality that I like to push, is more about incremental improvement versus a one shot, white room type approach to building a perfect health score.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentence. It's the same thing that we see too. Like get going. You're going to find a lot of things that you weren't aware of before out of the gate, and be able to really save renewals, improve your GRR, deliver more revenue, and you have the ability to make it a continuously improving system, which is going to be great for the business anyway. Because once you drive that initial improvement, your quota is going to go up, and the ability to continue to turn the dial will be important over time as you kind of reap more and more gains from the system. So completely agree there.
I know we're coming to the end here, but I do want to kind of ask one last, and I think maybe the most powerful question is, how do you advise CS teams and revenue teams to respond to risks? You know, they are used to probably we have a single health score number and it's a green account or a red
Yeah,
account. So run the risk playbook for a red account.
yeah,
Um, how do you suggest they go about doing that?
yeah,
Particularly when you're using ML, you have more detail about the actual risk. So, do you
yeah.
recommend having a single playbook for all red accounts, or do you have more specific, more granular responses based upon the signal?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it actually ties back to our last comments around you don't want to boil the ocean out of the gate, right? You want to do something that will be well adopted and consistent, and then iterate from there. I think the as a starting point though, for context, I think it's really important to draw out like one of the failings of customer scores historically is that they're often presented as black boxes. They show up as a number on a dashboard without a lot of context, and people are expected to blindly trust and do something as a result. I think because of that, there's a lot of just natural distrust for these kinds of scores. Um, a lot of CSMs will just ignore them and do the bare minimum to comply, but not really run their business that way. So we've put a lot of thought into how do we actually build trust in a way that people not only action the scores, but they really believe in the scores and understand them for what they are. So part of it is just our methodology, right? Before we deliver our first score, we will come in and do a readout and prove exactly how good the score is initially at predicting risk, right? So even if we say, okay, we're going to do one model for the entire base, maybe there's opportunity to improve from there, but we're going to come in and say, okay, we did a back test, which means that we trained the model on your data. Then we rewound the clock a year and we said, okay, what if
Mm.
this score was running a year ago? What would it have predicted? Who are the high risk customers? And then we can say, since it's already happened, what actually happened with the customers that we've predicted, right? How many of them actually churned? How many didn't? Did the Reef score miss any customers, right? The big thing out of the gate is you don't want to miss customers likely to churn. And if we can prove in that first model that there's room for improvement, but it was able to detect 74% of customers who ultimately churned. That's still likely to be much better than what you had before. And if you're engaging all of the high risk customers as a standard process, you're going to recover a lot of revenue that you would have lost otherwise. So through the back testing, we're able to establish a baseline to say that we're not just guessing at how good this score is, we're actually showing you exactly how it performed in a back test. On top of that, you mentioned it, there's a lot of different signals that the score is considering. So the other thing that we do is we show our work, right? So for any customer that scores as high risk, we're giving you what are the top signals that were in the data that cause this customer to be high risk at this moment in time, right? And we expose those to the end user. So we provide explainability or the context to say, okay, in detail, here are the top 3 risk reasons. And we not only just provide the signal, but we actually explain it in human readable detail to say, what does a signal actually mean? Why is it important? And, if a certain product signal has declined, the 30 days versus the 365-day average, what does that mean in terms of risk, right? So Reef demystifies that. It also shows you a more comprehensive list of, well, what are all the signals that are contributing to risk? Because we believe that showing our work is really important to establish trust with the recipients of the score, so the CSMs, so that they know where Reef is coming from. The other thing that we do is we deliver the score with what we call a PR campaign. Right? And so before we start sending scores, we actually we do a training and meet with the CS team to say, like we're going to be really transparent about what the score is good at, what it's not good at, right? It can't replace human engagement. Like your interactions with your customer is going to expose things that aren't evident in the score, and making sure that you have the context to apply. And you can, in the Reef model, you can disagree with the score, and that's perfectly fine, right? Let's say that we flag a customer high risk. You can disagree and say, hey, I talked to this customer yesterday. They're definitely renewing. The data is misleading in this case. That's fine. That disagree signal feeds back into our data set. It reinforces the model, and the model learns from that over time and makes it better, right? So we're just very upfront about what the model is designed to do, what it's good at, what it's still learning, so that people have a common understanding of where we are. And then when it comes to then driving action and playbooks, the idea is that what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we'll take these hundreds or even thousands of data points, and we'll really whittle that down to, because a model running in production, if you're running too many data points, you get a lot of conflicting signals that will either cancel each other out or reduce the efficacy of the model. So a final model will typically run between, call it 35 and 60 signals concurrently that are the best performing signals together. So the idea is that any of those signals could be contributing to risk. So you don't want to create granular playbooks for each signal, because it's just going to create a lot of noise. But there's usually themes, right? So there's themes around, hey, there's an engagement theme, right? So we see declining engagement from a customer, maybe across multiple signals, right? Their product engagement is declining. There's actually been a big drop in support cases, which is more often a bad thing than a good thing. It's not because they're not running into issues, but they're not using the product as much, or they don't care as much, so they're not raising their hand, right? And so there's usually this confluence of signals working together. And so if you can theme the signals into buckets, maybe engagement is one, maybe business conditions or is another, right? And so because you might find that your SMB customers inherently churn more often than your enterprise customers, which is a thing we see regularly, or there may be a tie to tenure and risk, right? Let's say and this is very, very different in different customers. In some customers, the longer the tenure, the lower the risk. In other customers, it's actually the opposite. Their older customers are higher risk because maybe their product's evolved and it's more valuable for new customers. The older customers are higher risk. So if you know inherently that an older risk is a customer is riskier and more problematic, you might have a playbook to say, what can we do to actually add more value for these old customers proactively, so that they're realizing more value, maybe even the ability to do proactive discounting, which is a last resort. But if you wait until the renewal to do that, then you're going to be fighting a fire, right? If you're more proactive. So we usually help customers based on what we see in their business, create that initial list of, I would say, 2 to 4 playbooks based on these different categories of risk that they can engage consistently every time they see a risk signal. And then as people start to get the motion down and buy into the process and say, okay, I have a simple way to identify risk, to action it, to reflect that action, then you can start to layer more and add more complexity to the process, and people will naturally adopt more because they have that baseline, they know how it works, you're not overwhelming them, and you can grow as you learn over time.
Such a great answer. And I say that because whenever you say something that aligns with how I think, I'm like, oh, that's a great answer. But the advice I give customers is, one, have a health score that has meaning. And what I see about most health scores is exactly what you described. They're black boxes. I have a score. I don't know what that score means. I don't really know what I need to do just because it's at 67. What does that tell me?
Sure.
And so the health scores I develop have specific meanings. And so that may mean for a particular company, I may have several different health scores. And the overall health of the customer is based upon looking at all those different health scores. But each health score is associated with a unique risk that's detected. And that risk has a certain probability as best I can do it. I'll do a little Python on the side to try to do a little ML. I actually took a couple ML courses to bootstrap a couple things to prove a point. But I can go through and say, hey, this account is green because this particular health score tripped.
Yep.
And then you can decide, to your point, based upon categories of signals, what's the right collection of playbooks to cover those risks. You don't want too many playbooks because then at that point you have a hard time of getting adherence, and then training new CSMs becomes difficult. But you don't want too few where you're using the wrong approach to solve a particular problem or risk issue. So you need to find that right balance, and you're not going to get there once. This is not a place where I can tell you, hey, you need 5, because the answer may be you need 1 or you need 20. We don't know. It really depends upon what works in your environment and how different the recovery approaches are for each risk signal. So that's one of the things where I think the best solution there is to live and learn. Start simple, add complexity when the complexity is needed. But don't go out and over engineer anything or try to boil the ocean. Just get started and get better along the way. This has been a great conversation. We agree on many things. I held back in the areas we disagreed because I didn't want to get this to go too long since we both ramble a bit. So I really appreciate your feedback and your transparency here. And I thank Emma and CSN Focus for allowing us a chance to connect and talk. Hopefully everyone else enjoyed it. But any last words, Brent?
No, I would. Oh, actually, I do have a couple last words. So I'll say no, but then I'll go in. I'll probably ramble a little bit more. But really enjoyed the conversation. And just as a parting shot, right? We talked about it a lot, but a data foundation is increasingly important. So really advocating within your organization, being thoughtful about how you build your data foundation, and not only what you see today, but making sure that you have access to what's happening over time, because the signals that identify risks today may be very different than the signals a year from now, because the business climates are changing so quickly. So making sure that you've got a data foundation, because people are getting more and more aspirational and saying, look, okay, we have LLMs, but we need the LLMs to have data to run on top of. Increasingly, we're seeing customers that want to build agents, and I think people are working towards autonomous renewal agents, autonomous growth agents, right? But they're only going to be as good as the foundation of data they have to work on. So we've created within Reef what we're calling the NRR intelligence graph, which is validated historical data about your transaction history, revenue history, engagement history with customers, paired with all of these forward predictions and context that become part of that formula for how do you create a credible data set these agents can work on top of to drive experiences that will be really the next generation experiences for customer success. So if there was one thing that you do today, I would encourage you to really think about, meet with your peers and your ops and your data org to really say, do we have an established baseline and roadmap for data availability? And if not, advocating in the organization to make sure that gets corrected quickly, because that will be really the difference between people that thrive over the next couple of years and the ones that struggle to catch up, is the data they have available to create these next generation experiences. So that'll be my parting shot.
And it's such a great parting spot, point there. And I know RevOps and some ops teams are already overwhelmed, but this is where I think many companies need to invest more, to be honest, because the future is paved with data at this point. With AI needs data. If you have terrible data going into any machine learning or any LLM, you're going to just get terrible results out the other end. So if, my parting shot for any company today is invest in your data. There was my background is in data analytics. I was at Pentaho and then led customer success and post-signature teams there. But one of the things that we said then was that basically data is the new oil, so to speak. It is the new lubricant for business. And this is ever more the case today than it was 10 years ago when that phrase really started to circulate. AI is fueled by data. Data. And if you're an executive in any role, you need to have the data. You need to have access to the data. This is one of the reasons why I like the concept of RevOps versus CS Ops, because I think RevOps now brings in a centralized data platform that everyone can pull from. When you start having marketing ops and CS ops and product ops, then these teams start to isolate and put their data into silos. And now you lose the ability to connect that data. The power is in the connections, not the individual data. We've already said that earlier, so I don't need to beat that horse, but that's that.
100%
I'm
agree.
looking to see if there's any more questions, but I saw that question. I just wanted to address it real quick because I think it echoes exactly your point there. Data is what you need if you're going to be an executive in the AI age.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you, Brent. Thank you so much. Those of you that are out in YouTube and LinkedIn Live, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the conversation, Anthony.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it.
We're all
I was
good?
waiting on someone to turn off the live, but maybe they're having connection. So, Brent, I'm